Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. This is Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier, and I am here with you on No Soundbites Allowed to talk to you about something that I think is rather important. I want to talk about promises that have been made to the public, promises that have not been kept, and had no intention of ever being kept in the first place. I think it's important that we hold politicians accountable for what they have said, what they are doing, and how much it is costing us, both in dollars and in freedom. So let's really look at this. Let's try and address the issue in New York State, as well as many states, the red flag legislation. Now, I want to take us back in time because it was back in January of this year that we saw that Governor Cuomo, along with Nancy Pelosi, it was February 25th, they went out there, they signed the red flag legislation. Now, for people who've been following me for a while, you know I am an advocate of the First Amendment. I hate red flag legislation. It is the worst thing that has ever been created, I believe, in terms of false narratives of giving people protection and safety in exchange for their freedom. In particular, due process, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the 15th Amendment, these are all being violated by red flag legislation. And I think it's one of the worst things you could possibly have. But Governor Cuomo felt it was really great, and he had a great time promoting the red flag legislation, and he was surrounded by friends like Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and he made the most of it. Now, let's flash forward a little bit with that, because just a few months later, the legislation became in effect. It was made into law, and New York State passed it under the single-party legislature of the Democratic Party, and Governor Cuomo had set the date. It was August 24th. The law would come into effect, and suddenly we would have red flags, and everyone would be safe because red flag laws would keep guns away from those who want to hurt themselves or others. That was the promise that was being made, that you will be safe because the government will take care of it. They will take away those firearms, those evil, nasty firearms from those evil, nasty, dangerous people, and you're going to be safe because of it. That was the promise that was made. Except on August 24th, when Governor Cuomo was going around, nobody knew how this law was going to work. Everyone knew that a part-time temporary badminton coach could start a red flag legislation. That's the law. They knew that almost anyone in a household could cause a red flag legislation, that no crime needed to be committed for a red flag legislation to take place. And this has happened. So the law came into effect, and Governor Cuomo, he was busy trying to make sure people understood, well, you can call the red flag. You can take away people's firearms, and that will have an impact on them. And I found it to be one of the most stupid things because nobody knew what was going on. In fact, it was so bad that when I went out, and I was speaking to a couple of members of government, and you can see this in the article that I did, the podcast, The Cliff Dive of Progressive Gun Control. I was talking just a little bit about it at that point. A smart idea, because everywhere we've seen this progressive socialist, this democratic socialist idea that the government is going to protect you. They're going to take away your firearms, and they'll be the ones to protect you. Every single time we've seen that the government's the one who kills people. And that's one of my biggest concerns about it. That's one of my biggest concerns when I was speaking about it September 28th, is that people are going to tell you that they can take care of you, that the government's going to make sure you're protected. Well, let's also think about what they were saying just a little bit earlier than that, back on August 23rd, when the law was being passed, when it went into effect. This is what the government had to say. As you can see, the red flag legislation is going to be starting. And I had a conversation with several members of government, in particular county executive, and I'm waiting for their response. And I'll mention the executive when I get the response so that I can do true justice to this. Where the answer is, after almost virtually 9 months of prep time, they have no idea what's going on. County governments in New York State do not know what's going on with this law. And let's stop right there, because that is a fact. The county executive I was speaking about in particular at that moment was County Executive Jason Garnar of Broome County, New York. And I spoke with him, as well as several parts of the government of Broome County, to try and get a very simple answer. For the red flag legislation that was passed in February by Governor Cuomo and the single party of New York, the Democratic Party, that the promise was made that people would be safe. We had no idea how much it would cost. We had no idea what kind of training was necessary. We had no idea of how this would be executed. And I asked County Executive Jason Garnar, can you tell me how much is this costing taxpayers? What new training is being done? What is the county doing about this law? And he had no answer. On August 23rd, he had no answer. And when we followed up with him in September, he had no answer. The budget for Broome County was just passed. It includes no funding for the red flag legislation that requires officers to go out and take firearms from individuals, from law-abiding citizens that have not broken the law. This is the problem that we find. And this is the culture and the environment that we're in, because I want you to understand, think about what's going on in this culture right now. The government is promising us that they are going to take care of us. At the very same time, the government is out there, like with Beto O'Rourke, promising that they're going to take away our firearms. And we have individuals like Joy Behar, who are on TV saying, don't worry, just don't tell them you're going to take away the firearms. Don't tell the American public that you're going to violate the Second Amendment, that you're going to violate the Constitution and take away people's freedoms and rights. That's what the advocates of the Democrats say. This is what progressives believe. Just don't tell people you're going to do this to them. Just do it. Just take away their freedom. I think everyone should be highly troubled by that, because what they're really saying is that pregnant mothers in Florida and New York State and across the country, they should die, that they shouldn't be able to protect themselves. Because as in this article, which we see from the New York Post, talking about, and this was from November 4th, and we see that a pregnant mother used an AR-15 to kill one home intruder that was pistol whipping her husband and abusing her child. Two men broke into a home in Florida. They were carrying pistols, breaking the law, to commit a crime, a home invasion. They pistol whipped the father. They immediately went after an 11-year-old girl, and they assaulted her. And the mother, who happened to be 8 months pregnant, got to her bedroom, got her husband's AR-15, and used it to defend herself and to defend her family, and that stopped the incident. Her husband, by the way, as reported, wound up with a fractured eye socket, fractured sinus cavity, a concussion, 20 stitches, and 3 staples in his head. And the only thing that kept him alive, according to his words, is his wife using the AR-15 to defend their family. But Joy Behar would prefer that you actually never got that opportunity. She would prefer that pregnant mother, that 11-year-old girl, and the wife's husband would all be dead today. That would make Joy Behar happier, because they would just take away your firearms. That's a very dangerous environment we're in. And that's why I decided to check out what is going on with the red flag legislation. And I spoke to the New York State Unified Court System, and I received this document, which is on screen right now, which is the statewide extreme risk protection orders that have been enacted since the law came to pass, since August 24th. So they sent this official document to me. And one of the things that caught my attention about this is that Broome County, New York, has one of those red flag orders in place. And I went back with that information and I asked again County Executive Jason Garnar, both in email and also while he appeared on a local news station news talk show, WNBF, and I asked him very directly on air, as well as in email to his office, you're the point person. You, the county executive, are the point person for the public and for the New York State government in organizing these red flag legislations. And I asked very simply, what is the cost? What is the training? Have they happened? He had no answer for me. He had no idea. He could not figure it out. And I have been waiting, and I still have been waiting for an answer from the county executive, and I have yet to receive that. I have also reached out to the sheriff and several other law enforcement agencies. But what I was able to find out is that this red flag legislation occurred. And what I know is that no one knew about it. I spoke to the county executive. I spoke to the sheriff's department. I had to go out to the trooper station. And the only answer I got is, well, no one knows the answer. It was done by the state police. No one knows why the incident occurred. No one knew how the incident occurred. And it wasn't until I actually reached out, and I tried to reach the state troopers at State Trooper Station C in Sydney, New York. Their contact person wasn't available. I then had to go over to one of their representatives, and I did finally get a state trooper, Duffy, who did get me the answer. And the fact was that there was a red flag because of an individual who was threatened to harm himself, and there were firearms in the house. He voluntarily gave up that firearm. And he was then, a red flag action was placed against him by the state police. Now, here's the thing that's important. Now, names could not be released on who the individual was, but I do know when it happened. It was on September 25th. And I know that there was no violent incident and that the firearms were voluntarily surrendered to the police. That red flag didn't save anyone. The red flag legislation didn't work. It didn't work because it wasn't necessary. The individual identified himself as someone who may hurt himself. Police became involved. He voluntarily went to a institution to be checked out, and he voluntarily gave up his guns. Red flag did not save anyone, didn't protect anyone. It did cost people money. How much money, I don't know, because no one in the county can tell me how much did it cost for that red flag legislation. What kind of rules are in place for red flag legislations? What kind of training is in place for it? We don't know. This is a problem because we were promised we would be safe. We were promised we would have these answers. I am still waiting 2 months later, and I don't have those answers. Let me ask you something. More recently, there was another incident that just happened. The election delayed me. We've been working on a lot of things, and I just got these answers this week. This week when I was in New York with Larry Sharp, and I was doing his show. And I wasn't able to do anything because we had election night. So here I am talking about it today. And just yesterday, there was an announcement. There was news. There was a teen who was involved in a shooting. It wasn't a mass shooting. It was near a school. St. John's, in fact, was the school that it was near in Binghamton, New York. And so a teen shot a man. Actually, they were both teens. One's just over the age of 18, so he would be the man who was shot by a teen, 17. And I have to ask you, with this news, with this information, that a teen shot another man with a .45 caliber gun, that is the accusation at this time, I have to ask you something. How are you made safer? The red flag law was in place to make sure that individuals could not get those firearms, that they would not be able to use those firearms, that they would not be able to shoot someone near a school. The gun-free zone. So they violated a gun-free zone. In fact, there was another thing that was violated in this action by a 17-year-old, and that was the fact that he broke the law because he wasn't legally able to own a firearm. He was not legally able to possess the firearm. The fact that he shot someone with a firearm should have been prevented, at least according to Democratic progressive ideology. He shouldn't be able to do that because he shouldn't have had the gun in the first place. Because there's a law. Because a law will prevent any criminal from doing anything. Well, according to New York Consolidated Laws, Penal Law 400.1a states that anyone who is under the age of 21 years of age cannot have a firearm, a pistol in their possession. And yet he did. So the promise that was made about the red flag law protecting people has been visibly and actively proven not to be happening. Because the gentleman who tried to commit suicide didn't stop him. It was after the fact. And again, he voluntarily gave up his firearms. Police could have asked him for that without the red flag legislation, and normally would ask for it without that legislation, that law. The teen, the 17-year-old who shot a .45 caliber gun on nearby a school in an argument over a drug deal with another slightly older teen, did not stop because of the red flag legislation. And even if you want to charge the red flag legislation, there are other crimes here. You have illegal gun possession, reckless endangerment of lives for firing the firearm, attempted murder. These are the problems. You don't need the red flag legislation. So how much is this costing people? How is this benefiting anyone? I ask these questions because they're important questions to ask. And I have to understand, and let me correct myself, because Trooper Duffy actually said it was September 7th that this happened. On September 12th, the Supreme Court issued the ERPO, or red flag legislation. And the firearms were surrendered on September 14th. So I have a couple of issues here. And this is a problem. Look, folks, this is a promise that was never meant to be lived up to. It was very simple. They promised that you would be safe. You're not. They promised you that the government would step in and take care of you, that you didn't have to own a firearm because the government would protect you from people who could harm you and harm themselves. And yet, people are doing that anyway. In fact, if we look at the New York GIV report, which is a very important report, it tells us about the number of firearms being used in New York State. It's the Gun Involved Violence Elimination Initiative, covering 17 of the biggest cities in New York State. And this shows us over and over again, criminals still have firearms, they're still committing murders, there's still no difference. And that's with the New York SAFE Act, that's with red flag legislation. It doesn't change because criminals don't care. And you can look over the data yourself. But it shows one thing very, very obviously. Things haven't changed. There are still people being shot. There are still people being killed. Criminals still get possession of firearms illegally. The data is there. The promise failed. They lied to you. They didn't tell you the truth. And we should hold them accountable for this. This is wrong. Every one of these politicians are at fault here because they're now punishing legal gun owners for something that isn't a problem. Legal gun owners aren't the problem. The 17-year-old who illegally went out and had a firearm and used it to try and kill someone because of a problem with a drug deal, there's your problem. There's a lot of problems in that statement. And the solution isn't, well, let's have a red flag law so we can take away his firearm. That doesn't resolve the drug deal. That doesn't resolve the fact that a 17-year-old got an illegal firearm. There's your problem. Why does a 17-year-old want to be involved with drug dealing? Why is this 17-year-old who's angry about a bad drug deal deciding the only answer is to shoot up people, and particularly near a school? There's your problem. The promise that was made to you is you're going to be safe. You're not. You're not safer. The promise that's being made is that you don't need to have a Second Amendment and that politicians can take away your firearms like Joy Behar says, and they just won't tell you about it, and they'll just do it after the fact. Something that gun owners have been very worried about for a long time. And here I am doing research, and all I can tell you is the government at the county level doesn't know what's going on. The government at the state level doesn't know what's going on. They don't know how much it costs. They don't know how to train people for this. They don't know how to enact this. And if they can't do that, how can they protect you? And as I can see, they aren't. I don't blame them that they can't protect us from all the bad people out there, all the people who choose to break the law. I can't blame them for that. I can blame them for making a promise that they will, and that it's only going to cost us a little bit of freedom. We just have to get rid of due process. We just have to get rid of the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the 15th Amendment. You know what? No, I don't want to give those up because the government isn't better than me protecting myself. The government isn't better than a 8-month pregnant mother protecting her family and protecting herself from criminals who would break into their home and try and kill them. I'm sorry. The government's not going to protect you against that. And the red flag laws that exist in Florida, that exist in New York, are not protecting you. There's 129 red flag actions that have been done in New York State at this time. And the public's still just as much in danger from criminals as they ever were. The promise was a lie. And that's a problem. But we'll talk more about it. You tell me what you think. Let me know how you feel about it, and I look forward to talking to you again very, very soon. Thank you.